Internacional para la Paz de Toledo. Desafortunadamente, el otro panelista para la conversación, Mark Otte, no puede estar aquí con nosotros hoy. La conversación empezará en un momento, pero primero me complace presentarles a nuestro moderador. Durante sus 25 años trabajando en The New York Times, ha sido responsable de la delegación en Jerusalén, Berlín, Europa Central y los Balcanes, Moscú y Bangkok, así como corresponsal diplomático en Washington y editor de la cultura metropolitana en Nueva York. En 2002 compartió el premio Pulitzer de Información Explicativa otorgado a The New York Times por su trabajo sobre Al-Qaeda. Por favor, demos la bienvenida al responsable de nuestra delegación de The New York Times en París, Steven Erlanger, y nuestro invitado especial, el profesor Shlomo Ben-Ami.
Thank you very, very much. I'm Steven Erlanger, and I very much appreciate all of you coming here today. You've heard who we are. We'd like this to be an open conversation, and we're going to talk for a bit and talk to each other, and then we're going to open it up for questions from you. And when we do that, please speak in any language you like. There is translation, so don't be shy. If you don't speak English, ask your questions in Spanish, okay? So, before I went to Paris, spent 4 years in the Middle East, covering Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza, the peace process such as it was. Shlomo, as you heard, has been very engaged, was the Israeli foreign minister, deeply engaged in negotiations, and also wrote a very good book, which I recommend to you, which I hope is in Spanish. It is in Spanish. Yes, it is in Spanish, called Scars of War, Wounds of Peace, which is a very thoughtful, insightful look at the problem of the peace process and why it's stalled, why it's so difficult. So we have a lot of topics today. There's a lot of news as well. So I want to get to all these things. But the larger topic is what we call the Arab Spring. Now, I have an Egyptian friend, a former foreign minister, who says to me, you people in the West are crazy. We don't have spring in the Arab world. There is no spring, you know? It's hot. We have a winter and we have a summer. We don't really have a spring. But we think of it, I think, because of the Spring of Nations, the revolutions in Europe of 1848. Maybe that's where the name comes from. I'm not sure. But the first thing I'm going to do is to ask Mr. Ben-Ami simply an open question. What has the Arab Spring changed? What has it altered? And what has it left untouched? So please, Shlomo.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I think that in modern history, we have known already one Arab awakening. It was in the 1930s. And the difference between then and now, it affects directly, I think, your question, is that that awakening had to do with a confrontation between the Arab world and the outside world. That was about nationalism. It was about Arab nationalism. That was an outward-looking awakening, whereas the current awakening has to do with domestic problems. It's inward-looking. Therefore, what you see is a rebellion that is being staged by the masses, by the middle classes, as it were, against rulers that were incompetent, dictatorial, corrupt, etc., etc. So initially, it did nothing. It had nothing to do with the colonialism or the dark forces of Zionism, etc., as it was in the 1930s. Nonetheless, before the dust has settled on the squares of Tahrir and in Tunisia, you can already see the impact that this Arab Spring is having on these external forces. It is on the West, on the strategic structure of the Middle East, on Israel as such, on the Israeli-Palestinian problem. And I think one central outcome of this is that it is clear that democracy is inherently less stable than dictatorship. And of course, a transition to democracy is even more unstable, inherently. So that stability that you had with the dictators that were interested in stability at home and with the neighbors. They were not interested in conflict, in wars. If you take the case of Mubarak, Mubarak was an ally of Israel. He was even complicit with Israeli siege of Gaza because we shared interest. And the two of us were clients of the US in a way. So we shared many interests. Even in the case of Syria, there was stability. Israel is holding the Golan Heights for the last 45 years. Right. And there has never a shot fired on the Golan Heights since 1974.
Until 6 months ago.
Well, yes,
yeah, right,
but
right.
I mean, because of the Nakba Day, yes, etc. But not right. Between the armies.
That's right.
So stability was the name of the game. And foreign policy was being run by the leaders, by the rulers. Now, what we have is this. We have revolutions that, again, if you take the case of Egypt, it is so far a revolution manqué. It is a revolution that hasn't reached its objectives. And it still remains to be seen if it will reach its objectives. My view is that what is going on in the Arab world is going to be the big tournament of the 21st century. This is not something that will be resolved in a matter of days. This is not a linear process. You topple the dictator and you're going straight on a highway to democracy. So since this is a revolution manqué, what you see clearly in Egypt is that the leaders, the rulers, the military rulers, staged in a way a coup d'etat against Mubarak. The masses wanted a revolution and the army staged the coup d'etat. So how do you satisfy the restless masses? Well, you create all kinds of diversions. And Israel-Palestine has always been a convenient diversion. You saw it in the event, in the clash with the Israeli embassy. It was impossible to find Marshal or Field Marshal Tantawi. Not even Obama could get hold of him because he didn't want to confront the masses. He might be ready to confront them on the degree of revolution that they want, on the degree of change, but not on the Palestinian issue. It's okay. It's it's an outlet to the rage of the masses. So there is here a danger for Israel, for the West, but particularly for Israel, if Israel does not move seriously on the Palestinian front. There is a danger that although the Egyptians and others around us do not want a war, and the Egyptians are not interested in canceling, abrogating the peace treaty with Israel. They are not. Every Egyptian leader understands that they have such colossal problems inside, and if they want problems outside, I can give them a number of them. Southern Sudan, Sudan is one of them. Libya, who knows what is going to happen in Libya? So they have plenty on their plate. They don't want to abrogate the peace treaty with Israel. Nonetheless, tension is another matter. And the foreign policy that is much more attentive to the voices of the masses, unlike in the case of Mubarak, there's no problem. They will be more attentive. So we are for a foreign policy, like in the case of Turkey, that is much more robust on the Palestinian-Israeli issue, that will put Israel in the dock on issues of human rights, on the way it treats the Palestinians, et cetera, and to a degree that might bring Israel to change its priorities in terms of defense. So far, that was a quiet, a calm front. It is no longer Egypt. So I think, but there is another thing that you can see already. Before the Arab Spring, one had the impression that the Middle East is split in two camps. A declining Arab camp, with Mubarak, an ailing dictator, with the Saudi king in the last phase of his capabilities to run the country, and with the Arabs totally irrelevant to the solution of the Iraqi problem, and totally irrelevant to the solution of the Palestinian problem. So that was a camp that was in decline, the Arab camp. And then non-Arab alignment that included Turkey, Iran, with two proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, these were the forces that were dictating the agenda of the region. There was an axis of resistance with Turkey and Iran, resistance to the designs of the US and Israel in the region, and there was a declining Arab world. So I think what the Arab Spring did was, to begin with, to dissolve the axis of resistance. Hamas withdrew from its alliance with Syria. They saw the Syrians as no longer an efficient ally, and they signed with the pro-Western Palestinian Authority an agreement exactly, not even a iota changed, exactly the same text that they refused to sign before the Arab Spring. So because that axis is no longer valid. The Turks disengaged from the Syrians, and even disengaged from the Iranians, and not only because of Syria, but because they differ on the Gulf. There is the Bahrain crisis, for example, exposed immediately the differences between Turkey and Iran. The Iranians were interested in introducing themselves into the Persian Gulf and presenting themselves as the champions of the Shiites in Bahrain, although the Shiites in Bahrain were not calling for an Islamist regime. They wanted just equal rights. But the Saudis were very shrewd in playing the game vis-à-vis the US, that they were defending the Persian Gulf from Iranian subversion. So, and there the Turks also were very explicit when they say to the Iranians, no, by the way, Turkey has a special agreement with the Council of the Gulf countries, some kind of strategic agreements, so they stop the propaganda or the intrusion of the Iranians. So I think that this is one immediate result. Right. There is no longer an axis of resistance, and the Turks are now looking for a new role in the region.
Well, this is part of what I want to do is come back to the problem of Israel's difficulties in a bit, because part of what you're describing is a breakdown of Israel's cold alliances with Egypt, with Jordan, which is in some difficulty, with Turkey. So Israel's even lonelier than before. It is true that what you call the axis of resistance is weaker. I think Iran is made weaker by democratic movements elsewhere, given its own repression of its own election. Mm-hmm. But Israel is left perhaps without a great deal of joy out of the difficulties of that axis, because the ones that supported it are in a great deal of difficulty. I mean, I agree with you very much that, I mean, what began in a great deal of joy has turned differently, and it's complicated, and it's country by country, I mean, I think you really can make a case that what you have in Egypt is not a revolution, but a coup d'etat, much as you've said, that the army, with the support of the United States, decided to stop the process, to manage it, because the army has many interests in Egypt, economic and other interests, and the West was very happy to have that. And so it's true that the army, in a way, has been floundering. They did a sort of deal with the Muslim Brotherhood. They've been scapegoating. I think this Mubarak trial is an effort to pacify anger that's partly aimed at the military for moving so slowly. And it's also true that some of the Egyptian positions on Gaza and so on, I think, are sincere, but they're very much a reflection of popular will. I mean, I wanted to just go back half a step before we get to this and just remind you all a little bit of the Arab world before Tunisia, because I think we all worried, demographers all knew there was this enormous youth bubble in the Arab world. It was enormous, and people talked about it, and people didn't know what the political results of it would be. They mostly talked in terms of the economic problems it created, in terms of joblessness and so on. I want to give you a couple figures about Egypt which may help you understand this. In general, now, in the Middle East, North African region, about 65% of the population is under the age of 30, 65%. It's become a very, very young, partly because health has gotten better, healthcare has gotten better, people live longer, there are more live births and so on, and people with a little more money would be more likely to have children. The population of Egypt in 1966 was about 30 million people. By 2008, it is 80 million people, if you can imagine. It's an enormous expansion. And about 40% of those 80 million people live on roughly $2 a day. Okay, 40% of the 80 million people. In Egypt, you had 4% of the population a year entering the job force. So there was an enormous pressure on employment. Unemployment in Egypt was almost 10 times as high for college graduates as for non-college graduates. People got their educations, but there was no work for them. And the median age was very, very, very young. I mean, basically, revolutions tend to happen among young people. People want mastery over their lives. The internet tells them how the world is working. They don't understand why they can't live as other people live. In Egypt, the median age, that's the age where half the population is older and half is younger. In Egypt, it's 24 years of age, okay? In Yemen, it's 16, the median age. In Gaza, it's 17 and a half. In Tunisia, it's 29. In Spain, it is 40. In your country, half the population is older than 40 and half is younger, compared to Yemen of 16. Germany is 43.7. Italy is 44. France is 40. So you see, there was an enormous youth pressure. And I say this just because it's very important the way Shlomo began this. These things began for domestic reasons. They had nothing really to do with Al-Qaeda. They didn't have to do with radical Islam. They didn't have to do with the Muslim Brotherhood. They didn't have to do with Israel. They were about how do we live decent, dignified lives in our own countries with these governments that are corrupted, that are aging, that play favorites. So it begins there, and it's very exciting and wonderful, but also, I would say, chaotic, because if you look at the 1848 liberal revolutions in Europe, which was the spring of nations that I started to talk about, there was a lot of chaos. I mean, you actually, in Europe, had probably the worst 200 years ever in terms of bloodshed in Europe. Now it's fine. Everyone thinks, well, it's all united and democratic and East and West. It took a long time to get there. And there were lots of very bloody occurrences and counter-revolutions and fascism and everything else in between. So I think we all have to be patient and take this longer view. At the same time, here we are with the Palestinian president, Abu Mazen, just having declared that he's going to go to the United Nations to seek a Security Council vote on statehood for the Palestinians, at a time where, as we've discussed, the Palestinians have not yet had their own Arab Spring, and Israel is feeling, I think, rather isolated. So that's what I wanted to ask you about. Does this open up opportunities, or does it make things harder to move?
Well, I think that more than opening opportunities, it makes it imperative. It makes it practically the only way that remains for Israel to try and reconcile itself with its neighborhood. It's no longer a question of choice, because, and I don't want to say by that resolving the Palestinian dispute is going to be the panacea for all the problems of what is one of the most dysfunctional parts of the planet. To assume that by solving the Palestinian dispute, we are going to turn the Middle East into the Europe of the post-Second World War era is, of course, very naive. But I am one who believes that Israel needs to solve the Palestinian problem, not because it reconciles her with her neighbors, not because this is important for strategic reasons, not because it will take her out of the diplomatic isolation she finds herself in, but simply because this is the best thing for Israel as such. I think that Israel has been going astray, has been moving away from the right course of, that was set for the Jewish state from the outset by the founding fathers. I think that it is immoral, it is politically wrong, it is morally wrong, it is economically wrong. We have seen now in Israeli 15th of March. You know, in Spain they have the 15th of March, which was, in my view, is one of the most admirable 15 of Marches that you can come across. I was personally in that demonstration in Tel Aviv, almost 500,000 people in a country of 7.5 million, extremely civilized, of the mainstream Israelis that were very careful not to say anything about the Palestinian problem, settlers, what have you, because they didn't want to be divisive at that point, but the implicit message was there. How can we, those who serve in the army, go to the reserve, pay our taxes, how can we go on like this if you continue to divert all the budgets to the settlers and to the Orthodox Jews? That was not said explicitly, but it is the implicit message.
Well, I mean, this is what I want to ask you to explain a bit, which is Israel has moved domestically. The left has been almost dead in Israel. There are domestic reasons why. It may have to do with Russian immigration. It may have to do with lots of things. But it's a country, I think, has moved very sharply to the right. Why is that? What happened to move it there?
I think that the watershed was Camp David. I think that the watershed was Camp David when, rightly or wrongly, the message that was conveyed to the Israeli people was that the Palestinians do not want peace. And to very far-reaching proposals like the ones that were made, not necessarily at Camp David. I said more than once that if I were a Palestinian, I would not have accepted the Camp David package. But yes, I would have accepted, and I'm not a Palestinian, the Clinton peace parameters that were rejected by Arafat. So I think that the notion that permeated the Israeli society was, listen, these people do not want peace. And on top of it, we saw the Intifada and the suicide terrorism, and this is what shifted public opinion to the right. Again, this does not necessarily mean that the Israelis want to stay in the territories. The key to Sharon's popularity lied in that he understood that the Israelis do not want the territories, but they do not want to negotiate either. So he invented unilateralism. So we are stuck in a situation whereby there is no dialogue between the parties. The sense that Israeli policymakers have is that there is no way the maximum that they can propose to the Palestinians will meet the minimum of the requirements, and we are stuck there. And we do not have a mediator, in this case the US, that is robust enough, that is credible enough in the eyes of the other side. It is seen as not even-handed. And on top of it, we have seen the US power in the Middle East declining, its capacity to influence the region is diminishing. I always say that people always saw Obama as a revolutionary. And I claim that the real revolutionary was Bush. Obama is not a revolutionary. The election of Obama was a revolutionary event in American history. But he is not a revolutionary president. The guy who wanted to revolutionize the Middle East was Bush. He was the one that came and said, this is a dysfunctional region, let us create constructive instability that is, in order to build something new, etc. The problem is that he left us with the instability without the construction. And then Obama came in an era of economic decline, of imperial overstretching, and he himself seems not to have raised to the occasions here. So America itself is no longer strong enough vis-a-vis the Arab sides or credible enough. They have betrayed Mubarak, they have betrayed Ben Ali, and they are not, they look rather indifferent to what is going on in Syria. I mean, the American policy is lacking a spinal cord. It's lacking
a spine.
It's lacking a sense of direction in the region. So the Palestinians are fully right. I can understand that. I saw Abu Mazen here in Madrid a month ago or so, slightly more than a month ago, and I can see why he came to the conclusion that he needs to revolutionize the situation. He needs to introduce a new paradigm that will change the parameters of the situation, so maybe something will come out of it, although I'm not convinced he knows what exactly is going to happen. I mean, he doesn't have a clear roadmap as to the future after this this UN vote.
I mean, I want to come back to that, but I also want to take just 2 minutes to talk a little bit about what's happened domestically on the Palestinian side also, because I spent a lot of time in Gaza and the West Bank, and I must say I came away feeling that these were two peoples, the Israelis and the Palestinians, who had not only lost faith in each other, but also a little bit in themselves. I mean, that they really weren't sure what to do, how to make it. Palestinian kids were leaving. There was very little future, they thought, for them. And Fatah, which runs the PLO and still does, is considered to simply have failed. I mean, it promised people revolution and it failed to deliver that. It promised them a state and it failed to deliver that. And the Hamas criticism, the critique, which you saw in their semi-victory in Parliament vote, came out of just a general disgust with the corruption and collaboration, I would say, of Fatah with what many Palestinians consider to be the occupier. I mean, everyone in Fatah was getting kickbacks. Fatah officials were profiting from the concrete used to build the separation barrier, the wall, the fence. Fatah leaders had special permits from the Israelis so they could travel in and out easily and go abroad. And Palestinians knew this. So there was a disgust with the old pattern. I don't mean to blame Fatah for everything, but it is true they failed to deliver on what they promised, much as Oslo failed to deliver on what it promised. And the Palestinian Authority had become, to me, another kind of corrupt Arab state with a big secret service. And Palestinians knew it, and kids were leaving. And so it wasn't a surprise to me that Hamas won, partly because Fatah blew the election. So what you have, in a way, and it's important, I think, to remember this, you have a divided Palestinian people. In some ways, you have 3 states now, because Hamas runs Gaza, and it's not going to give it up very easily. Gaza is very isolated, but Fatah has very little influence there. I don't think it is going to have influence there again for a very long time. Abu Mazen is afraid to go there. And the West Bank has been run pretty well by Salam Fayyad, who's not elected by anybody, who's an economist, went to the University of Texas, a wonderful man, by the way, charming, smart, but undemocratic leader who has tried to pull the West Bank into economic progress. He's done a very good job with the help of the Israelis. But to some degree, he too is seen as a bit of a collaborator with the sort of Netanyahu government. So you have among the Palestinians a lot of disgust and depression. And this is part of what Abu Mazen is trying to break through this effort to go to the UN. And it struck me, just to come back to what you were saying, he must be very angry with President Obama, because Washington has worked very hard to get Abu Mazen not to go to the Security Council, not to go to the United Nations, to do something else, because the United States has promised to veto a Palestinian effort at statehood in the Security Council. And yet that's the choice Abu Mazen made. What's going to be the implication of that, do you think?
I wanted, if I may, before getting
Disagree.
to... No, I mean,
okay.
before getting to the question of
yes.
the access to or the bid to go to the UN, you spoke about the rise of Hamas as part of the failure of the PA, of the Palestinian Authority, the corruption, and their incapacity to deliver on the peace process. But perhaps to link it to the Arab Spring, I think that what we have here throughout the entire Arab world is the crisis of the Arab state, the state as such. And who knows what would be the outcome of this revolutionary process in terms of whether or not the Arab states, as we knew them since the end of British and French colonialism, will remain intact. A country like Iraq, will it remain united? Libya, that was essentially Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, will it remain, and the other tribes, will it remain united as a state? North Yemen and South Yemen, there is a problem that even before the Arab Spring was very present in the mind of people. So I think that the fact that the secular nationalists, the Nassers, the Sadats, the Mubaraks, failed in delivering is the reason, and it had nothing to do with the Arab-Israeli peace process, is the reason for the emergence of this alternative of Islam. Islam was the response to the failure, to the colossal failure of the secular Arab nationalism in Palestine and elsewhere. So I think that the Arab Spring is the test of whether the state can now modernize itself, no longer through the men on horseback taking power, as it happened in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, but through a civilian process, through a revolution run by the masses. So in that way, Palestine is part of a tapestry of the entire region. Now, I think that, to go back to your question about Obama, I think that it puzzles me, you know. We have been in this process. I mean, our body is full of injuries from this process. I was a member of the Israeli delegation in Madrid, so 20 years ago, almost. And we went to places.
The wounds of peace.
Yeah, I mean, that's. I mean, they used to say, join the peace process, see the world. We had meetings in Japan, in Tunisia, in what have you. I mean, all over the place with all kind of formulas. I spent 2 marvelous weeks in Camp David. Well, marvelous because of the site, not because of the negotiations. And then nothing came out of it. So Obama comes after 20 years of experience, of knowledge and experience that must have been accumulated. And frankly, I must say that he was wrong from the outset. I mean, you see, the Nobel Peace prize winner, Rabin, was a person that expanded the settlements. And now he is the martyr of peace. Olmert expanded settlements, but eventually put on the table to Abu Mazen, in the last days of his term, a proposal that was almost like the one in Taba and beyond. And it was rejected. So the fact that he expanded settlements did not serve as an obstacle for him to move on the peace front. Now, when Obama comes and says freeze of settlements, why the Palestinians will say less? And then when he retracted, the Palestinians stayed on the tree. I mean, they didn't want to get down. And in fact, it was impossible. You see, Israel is wrong in building settlements. But it so happens that if you want to start by freezing or dismantling settlements, you will be paying the political price given the lunatic, suicidal electoral system that we have, coalition, that builds coalition governments between disparate elements. So you will have to pay the political price that you are supposed to pay for the final agreement. You will pay it now. He should have understood that. Dennis Ross might have been able to tell him, but Dennis Ross is so unpopular in the Arab world. He could have, or somebody else could have told him.
And at that moment, Dennis was in exile at the State Department.
At the State Department. Yeah. So I think, and now that he came back to the White House, I mean, the Europeans.
Well, you know, I mean, I was very struck by this because you remember the Obama speech in Cairo, which was a very important speech and a brave speech, and it got a lot of good reaction in the Arab world, and I think actually had a little element in the Arab Spring too, because it, you know, this was a call toward responsibility. And I never understood why he didn't then immediately go to Jerusalem and make a similar speech, honest speech to the Israelis about their problems, their failures, what they needed to do. Obama has never gone to Israel as president. And part of the problem is the Israelis don't really trust him. The Palestinians feel very disappointed in him because he promised them things that he did not deliver or walked back on. So I find, you know, the Abu Mazen challenge to the Security Council, it's a little desperate on the part of Abu Mazen's part, I think, but I think it's also a bit of a slap to Washington because the veto is going to be quite difficult to cast. I mean, there's time yet, and maybe something will change. But do you think the EU, President Sarkozy and others have said the EU should vote with one voice on this question of a Palestinian state at the United Nations? There's disagreement within the EU, of course. But what do you think Shlomo, how should the EU vote? Javier Solana wrote an op-ed piece
with
today.
Marty Tisari.
Right, with Marty Ahtisaari, which is in our International Herald Tribune today on the op-ed page, saying there are 10 reasons why Europe should vote for a Palestinian state. It's very well argued, but what do you think?
Well, I thought from the very beginning that, and this is what I wrote and said in the Israeli media when I was interviewed, that Israel should have agreed to the Palestinian initiative, but it should have done it through opening a dialogue with the US and other potential allies, Europeans and others, in order to write a text that might be acceptable to the parties, or at least fit the essential preoccupations of Israel, the essential concerns. I think that we had here a golden opportunity to bring the US, to negotiate with the US, a text that the US could lobby the Europeans and others to bring into to the General Assembly, and because there is here one major advantage for Israel in this initiative, that the current Israeli government is incapable of gauging it, of assuming it, as it were, and that is that by recognizing the Palestinian state in the borders of 1967, what the General Assembly might be doing, because I don't believe that it will pass in the Security Council. The Americans have vowed to veto it, which will create a very serious problem for America in the Arab world, precisely now that the entire region is calling, is clamoring for freedom and liberty, etc., for America now to stand with a right-wing Israeli government in a position that is seen as anti-freedom by the masses, will cause a lot of harm to America's position in the region. But I think that this initiative of the Palestinians, what it does, excuse me for the heavy word I'm going to use, it territorializes the problem. It turns it into a territorial dispute between two independent states. It won't say anything about refugees, for example. And this is the reason the Jordanians, although they are going to support it because they don't have an alternative, are against it. Because they are those who are most worried about the refugee problem. They understand that by creating, although as a fictitious reality to start with, a state in borders, what you create is a border dispute. And all the mythological issues, those non-tangible problems that turn this conflict so difficult to resolve, refugees and holy places, and refugees is the core of Palestinian nationalism. And this is the major preoccupation of countries like Jordan. And this is why they are against it. And this is the advantage of Israel. I mean, Israel could have turned this into a banal border dispute. You know, Chile and Bolivia have a border problem, so we have a border problem. And this is where we went wrong, and we brought America to a collision course. We already are in a collision course with the Arab world. Now we brought America deeper into the collision course she is now with the Arab world.
Good. Now, I'm going to ask one more thing, but then I'm going to go to you for questions. So please think of questions that you might want to ask Mr. Ben-Ami or me. But just as you do that, I just want to ask you, do you think Bashar al-Assad will be running Syria 6 months from now?
I don't believe. I think that if he were able, again, this is a terrible thing to say, but if he were able to conduct the kind of repression that his father conducted, you know, one event, and people forget because the agenda of the international community in the region moves and rolls on, and people forget very, very easily. He might have perhaps survived as a dictatorial regime, obviously. But given the fact that you see this resistance of the masses, this courage of people that go onto the streets every day, every Friday, and confront the army, I think he has lost all legitimacy among his people, and in the region as well. He has already lost Turkey. He's losing the Arab League. I think he's entirely isolated, and I frankly find it extremely difficult to believe that he will survive the next month.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put these on so I can understand your questions. But would anyone like to ask Mr. Ben-Ami a question? Anyone? Right here, please, sir. Do we have a microphone? Just perfect.
You said that the Israeli population is becoming more and more conservative politically. We know that the American population is becoming more and more conservative politically.
Can you raise your voice, please?
You said that the population in Israel is becoming more conservative.
Yeah.
We all know that the American population is also becoming more conservative with the success of the Tea Party and all that. Don't you think that that is probably the main reason why Obama didn't feel the support or enough support to be more a protagonist in that situation in Palestine these days?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no doubt that, you know, when Kissinger once said something which I think is quite unfair. It's true, but unfair. He said that Israel doesn't have a foreign policy, it only has a domestic policy. But it is true of most countries. I mean, foreign policies are not run in a void. They are run according to the tradition, to the political forces that you rely on, to the political culture, etc. So this is the case of Obama as well. I think that he came, you know, his mentor on the Palestinian issue before he came to office was a very good friend of mine who went with me to St. Anthony's College, Rashid Khalidi, and wrote, is an excellent scholar. Now he is the Edward Said chair in Columbia University, and he was the mentor of Obama. And I know what Rashid thinks, and obviously what Obama thought. But he's shrewd and wise and more pragmatic than people thought, and he sort of moved to a position that can be, on the one, that can reconcile his support for the need of the Palestinians to have a state with the political constraints. But the political constraints became tougher and tougher, especially after the mid-election results, with the Republicans getting the upper hand in Congress. So I think that and now, as we come closer to the general elections, he has become almost totally paralyzed and ineffective because of
I would just say quickly, I think he's found himself in the worst of both worlds because he made an effort, he annoyed a lot of American voters, and let's be clear, not just Jewish voters, because quite a lot of conservative Christians in America love Israel, and they're more extreme in their love of Israel than many American Jews are, and yet he didn't deliver, and he's ended up annoying the Palestinians, annoying traditional democratic voters, and we saw this recently in a by-election in New York State that just happened, where you had, it was a very Jewish district and a very conservative district, so it's not typical, but the fight was over who loved Israel more and who loved Obama less.
It is very
so
unfair.
it was very difficult.
It is very unfair to Obama that Israel should have developed this attitude towards him. I was told by Defense Minister Ehud Barak not long ago that he doesn't recall a president of the US that has served the security interest of Israel to the degree that Obama had. So that's and he didn't specify, but I can imagine, all kind of things. So I think that and now when we were in trouble in Cairo, with the Israeli embassy in Cairo, it was Obama that saved the day. Imagine 6 Israeli body bags coming out of that embassy. I mean, the entire thing would have changed. I mean, you might have had a scenario which is a doomsday scenario in terms of our relations with Egypt. And he saved that. It was he who gave Israel that service, and perhaps it is also in the interest of America. I think he was a very good president for the security needs of Israel, and Israel at least should have reciprocated by being much more forthcoming in terms of the peace process.
Other questions? Way in the back. The man right in the back.
Una pregunta. Han estado hablando del levantamiento en los países árabes o del Magreb y algún país también musulmán, pero me gustaría saber la opinión de los dos sobre un levantamiento también, aunque de otro tipo, en Israel, de decenas de miles de personas protestando en las calles, protestando por razones no solo económicas, sino también sociales, y que algunos intelectuales israelíes como Grossman les ha hecho escribir en el New York Times, que en Israel se había perdido quizá unos ideales que hasta entonces existían de solidaridad entre la gente y de igualdad entre la sociedad israelí. Y me gustaría saber si una de las razones por las que se ha perdido eso es que Israel ha utilizado como alibi el conflicto palestino-israelí y ha olvidado las cuestiones internas.
I just want to summarize that for the web audience, which is basically a question. We've talked about the Maghreb and the Arab Spring, but there's a kind of Israeli Spring going on, and how are the politicians manipulating the Israeli-Palestinian issue inside Israel? Also. Yeah. So please.
Yes. What you said is that maybe what the Israeli rulers, leaders are doing is using the Israeli-Palestinian dispute as an alibi for not solving economic and social problems. I think that that might not be the reason. I think that what we have had here in Israel since the 1980s is a neoliberal economic social deal that brought us to a situation whereby today we are one of the most stable economies, or progressive or prosperous economies in the Western economic system. Israel has, last year we had 5% economic growth. This year it's going to be less. The deficit is practically nothing. The shekel is one of the most robust currencies around. Israel has had successes in high-tech and all these things that are more or less known. But the price that was paid was the following: lower taxes for the upper echelons of society, heavy indirect and direct taxation for the middle classes, and a withdrawal of the state from public services, from the health service, from social services, etc. So the macroeconomics is excellent. It's great. Mrs. Lagarde would have applauded it. But it doesn't work because these people, this middle class, cannot afford housing, education for the children, the kindergarten, etc., etc. And this is the rebellion. Now, the link to the Palestinian problem is where the welfare state has collapsed on this side of the green line, but is booming on that side of the green line. That is, for the settlers, there is no crisis. Budgets, because of political reasons, are being channeled to housing, to infrastructure, to security, etc., etc. And to that part of the population which doesn't work. You see, Israel is an economic miracle when you take into account the fact that much of the population doesn't work. I mean, the Haredim, that is the Orthodox, who go to, not all the Orthodox.
The black hats.
Not all the, no, it was, they go to the yeshivas, to the rabbinical seminaries. They spend years studying the Torah. They get married. They get allowances from the government. And that's it. So they don't work for ideological reasons. And you have 1,200,000 Arabs that work, but are not in the mainstream of the new Israeli economy. And Arab women work less than Jewish women. So the labor market is quite reduced. And nonetheless, you have this economic growth, but the distribution is uneven. And there is another problem, strictly economic, socio-economic, as it were. There are 10 families that control the media, the banks, the monopolies, the friends of the government. So it comes out that an economy of acolytes, of friends of the government, happen not only in dictatorships, it can happen also in a democracy.
Right. And I must say, having lived there, it's probably the most expensive food shopping in the world.
Yeah.
The taxes, the prices are quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I was the other day.
And the quality is not so great.
No, a cup of tea, it was 3 euros. 3 euros, right. A cup of tea. Not in a snobbish restaurant, just in a bar.
Well, I mean,
so that's because of indirect taxation.
And then part of the question is, can the left in Israel use this economic unhappiness to rebuild itself politically? And that's the question, because...
Well, there is a lady now. There is a lady now that, Sheli Yachimovic, she came from your syndicate, from your profession. She was a journalist. And she went into politics 6 years ago. And she has made a name for herself as a tough fighter for social justice. And she now went to the primaries of the Labour Party, and she's now, together with another one of the politicians, one ex-leader of the party, former leader of the party, Amir Peretz, she's now competing against him for the leadership. The polls give her, and she doesn't speak at all about political issues, no Palestinians, no settlers, nothing, only social issues. The polls give her 22 seats if she is the leader of the party, which is from the 8 that they have now, is quite impressive. So it is possible to turn the social issue. It is not entirely impossible to turn the social issue into a leverage for political power, at least in principle, because when the trumpets of nationalism sound,
all then, reason disappears.
Then, we have seen it throughout history, not only in Israel, but also in Israel. Nationalism is a powerful force of mobilization. And I have my doubts if this can remain, these polls can stand for long.
Other questions? Is the young man here, please.
I have 2 questions for both of us. The first question is, what do you think about the Union for the Mediterranean, the UFM? Sorry. What do you think about the Union for the Mediterranean? And the second question is knowing that the young people are the main actors of the Arab Spring in this case, and knowing also the importance of the young people as the median age of the population age in the Middle East and North Africa countries reflect, do you believe that the governments commit a big mistake, including the Israel government, as we can see in the latest demonstrations in Tel Aviv, the government commit the big mistake of don't have enough the demands of the youth people.
Let me just start briefly. On the Union of the Mediterranean, which, I mean, you were probably involved with the Barcelona process, which led to the Union of the Mediterranean, and the Union of the Mediterranean was a kind of a French idea, and it probably shouldn't be, it's typically French idea, I would say, because it's a little bit grand. They hadn't thought through all the details. A lot of it was a way of keeping Turkey out of the European Union, give Turkey something else to do, which was the Union of the Mediterranean, involve the countries of the Maghreb so that their kids will stay at home and not immigrate illegally to continental Europe. So this was part of the French idea. And of course, who was the first co-chairman but Hosni Mubarak? So we see where that has ended up. So it became stalled over the new tensions between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And it became stalled with the Arab Spring. The French talk about bringing it back to life somehow. But, you know, they were trying to embrace Bashar al-Assad. It's a much more complicated landscape. So I don't have a lot of optimism for it. Maybe they'll meet again, but I don't see how they're going to pull it together. And yes, I think, you know, in general, I'll let Shlomo answer more about this, but, you know, these countries, Israel included, they're becoming real democracies, and young kids are the future, and they vote, and one has to satisfy, one has to give them a sense that there's a reason to work hard and live their lives, and that they will, in the end, have some say in a democratic process over who is ruling them, how they are ruled, and the policies of the government. Because the past, the population was so atomized, it was so separated from decision-making that, you know, you're going to have some chaos. But I think one really has to do that. I'm not, you know, in the prescription business to say how, but I think this is what the Egyptian army is fumbling with. I think the Tunisians are going to do a pretty good job, but it's a much smaller, more easily managed country. And I see big problems for countries like Jordan. We said in the beginning, usually it was the monarchies that were more stable in the Arab world. That was true in Morocco, in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, and so on, in the Gulf. I'm not sure that will continue, partly because they're less flexible. They've been less flexible in dealing with the democratic aspirations, which are more general, of young people.
I think that the Union for the Mediterranean is frankly, it is a stillborn initiative. I don't see that it can accomplish much, and not only because of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Steve dwelled specifically on the Arab-Israeli conflict as one particular reason, and obviously it is an obstacle. If there are no working relations between Israel and its neighbors, and all are supposed to work under one roof on regional issues, obviously it doesn't work. But there are inconsistencies also when it comes to the Arab world itself. People like to speak about the Israeli conflict as the major obstacle. What about Morocco and Algeria? The relations between Morocco and Algeria are non-existent, hostile. There are borders that are closed for years now. the instability in Algeria, the nature of the regime, the civil war that we had from the 90s onward, and even now, things are not that clear. So this is also a reason that countries cannot cooperate under the roof of the Union for the Mediterranean. And then what you have here is a lack of clarity. Is the Union of the Mediterranean a forum for conflict resolution or for projects of cooperation in spite of conflict? So it doesn't work. When there is conflict, governments do not want to give to their enemies the fruits of cooperation before the conflict has been solved. That was always the problem between Israel and the Arab world. Today, you know, there is another Obama initiative, which is one of the noblest initiatives you can imagine, and that is the question of global zero. That is that to have zero nuclear weapons, total elimination of nuclear weapons. By the way, we are now at the 25th anniversary of the Reagan-Gorbachev summit, where for the first time an American leader put on the table the total elimination of nuclear weapons. And why it can't work if you look at the region? Because the Arab side would like Israel to join a Middle East free of nuclear weapons. But in order to achieve that, you need some civilized relations between the peoples of the region, the governments of the region, because you need to talk about these things. So the Israelis say, okay, you need to give us some of the fruits of peace before we create spaces that is, you need to give us spaces of cooperation and collaboration before we can reach these kind of agreements that are very complex and that need negotiations and etc. There is an agreement or there is a document on denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, but it is a dead letter. Why? Because there is a state of war, because there is no. So the same can be said about the Union of the Mediterranean. You need to allow countries that are your enemies, say Israel, Palestine, or Israel, Arab world, and Morocco, Algeria, they need to accept that disputes can be solved by creating spaces of dialogue. Although the Union of the Mediterranean itself is not a conflict resolution forum, it can help resolve conflicts if the parties do not wait until their border disputes or any other dispute they might have in order to start talking to each other.
I think we've only got a few minutes left, so if there's another question, I would love to have that. And if not, well, you've had one. Is there anybody else?
I would like to ask, coming back to Turkey, do you think that Israel must fear the leading role of Turkey in the Muslim world, or is a chance?
Fear what exactly?
The role of Turkey in the Muslim world.
Okay. Ideally, Israel should have welcomed the role of Turkey in the Muslim world, being a democracy that has strong links to the West. And in spite of having been snubbed by the West, by Europe, still, even in the platform of Erdogan's party, the chapter of joining the EU is still there. I mean, they haven't abandoned it altogether. It is in the interest of a country like Israel that a country like Turkey will have working relations or influence in the Muslim world. I think it is in Israel's interest as I see it. If I have to choose who do I want to be the hegemonic power in the Muslim world, Iran or Turkey? I would choose Turkey, obviously. So I think that, but again, for that to be useful for Israel's interest, we need first to try and rebuild our links to Turkey. See, what happened between Israel and Turkey is, in a nutshell, the following. The initial alliance between Israel and Turkey in the 1950s was built on the assumption that there is not going to be an Israeli-Arab peace. And the alliance with Turkey was one way to circumvent the Israeli-Arab peace. Now, what the Turks tell us is that this is no longer the case. Rebuilding bridges with Turkey goes through an Israeli-Arab peace. That's the change that happened.
I would simply say, I mean, I'm watching Turkey with great fascination. I've always felt the idea of a democratic, effectively secular Muslim state is a very good model. You have Malaysia, of course, but that's different, it's far away. But Arab friends will say, well, should Turkey be a model for us as we're rebuilding our own countries in the Arab Spring? And Turks themselves would say this is very difficult, because first you would need an Ataturk, and you'd need a military government, and you'd need a forced secularization, and then you'd need a slow democracy. It's not an easy model. It's not one that's easily replicated. But Turkey, I think, does have a great deal to offer. The big question is, how much is Erdogan's rhetoric, some of it very anti-Israel, serious? Or how much of it is simply designed to say, Egypt's a mess, Iran's a mess, there's an opportunity for us to seize the leadership of a world that actually most Middle Easterners don't think Turkey's actually a part of. So there's a lot to play out. You've been incredibly patient with us.
Steve, this is why he said Muslim and not Arab.
Yes, that's true.
They don't run a real chance to be leaders in the Arab world, but yes, in the Muslim world. That's different.
Well, anyway, I simply, Shlomo, thank you so much for your time, and thank all of you for your patience. And let's give him a round of applause.